Good morning. My name is Jason Jorg, and I will be giving a brief on the attacks at Pearl Harbor. The purpose of this is to give an informed briefing about the events that took place during and around the Pearl Harbor attack. So I will be giving the who, what, when, where, and why, the background and the big picture, as more details into why it happened. I will be giving the attack details, more of a play-by-play of what happened in the attack. After that, I will give casualty recaps, and then after that will be a closing. So the 5 Ws, the WHO was the Japanese and American Naval and Air Forces, where the Japanese did a surprise attack on the Americans. This happened on December 7th, 1941. The first attack began at 7:53 a.m. This is at the Pearl Harbor base in Oahu, Hawaii, and the main reason that it happened was because of tensions that had built up between Japan and America over the last decade. This is a picture of Ford Island, which was their main target, which was in Pearl Harbor. So the background and the big picture, more of the why continued. It's largely because of the rising tensions over the last decade, which I mentioned, but the reason as to why these tensions had been built up were a few different reasons. So the Japanese wanted to expand over the Southeast Pacific after they had won a few wars against China and Russia. They had taken control of Nanjing, China, and in what was called the Nanjing Massacre was where they raped and killed most of their residents. This did not look good to the Americans. So that was one incident. Next was the USS Panay incident, which was when the Panay was docked at Nanjing and the Japanese just all of a sudden attacked and destroyed it. Now at this time, Japan and America were not at war with each other, so this was very unexpected to the Americans. And then another incident happened with John Moore Allison, who was an American diplomat in Japan. He was struck in the face by one of the Japanese soldiers. And so this is just another thing that didn't look good in the Americans' eyes. So a lot of people saw war as an inevitable thing between Japan and America. It was just a matter of time of when it was going to happen. And so Pearl Harbor was just that final straw that started that. The attack happened in 2 waves. The first wave consisted of 183 aircraft, Japanese aircraft, 40 of which were torpedo bombers and 49 of which were horizontal bombers. And they were all sent to attack the warships in Pearl Harbor, mainly around Ford Island. And like I said before, this began at about 7:53 a.m. And at this time, there were no US forces in the air, so it really was a complete surprise attack. First thing that the Japanese did was they dropped bombs on Hickam Airfield. The main reason they wanted to do this was because they did not want the US to get up in the air with them, because the less backfire they had, the better. So they just went ahead and destroyed a lot of the US aircraft in the beginning. Now most of the planes came from carriers that came over from Japan. The first carrier, the Soru, sent in some planes, and their main target was going to be aircraft carriers. However, unfortunately for the Japanese, all of the American carriers were out at sea this day, and none of them were in Pearl Harbor, so they could not attack any of them. They first ended up attacking the USS Utah and the USS Raleigh. The Utah is on the left and the Raleigh's on the right. They ended up mistaking them for battleships. Most of the planes went for the USS Utah. Most of the ships, or most of the missiles and torpedoes missed, and some even missed so badly that they hit the Raleigh. The Raleigh wasn't even a target at first. Some of the planes ended up recognizing that this was not one of their targets, so they all ended up flying around the island. Next, they also mistook USS Helena for a battleship as well. Um, the USS Helena is right here in between that little black ship, which is the Oglala, and the dock. The torpedoes actually went under the Oglala and hit the Helena and dealt damage to both of them. But again, some of the planes did not end up going for the USS Helena and got in formation to attack Battleship Row. Planes from the Hiru aircraft carrier also came in this same formation. Some attacked the Helena as well, but most of them got information for Battleship Row. From the direction that they were coming, which they were also joined by 24 more torpedo bombers, they really only had one avenue of approach from the direction they were coming. They had this little channel right here. They thought about going over these naval buildings right here, but this would not have worked out well for them because there would have been too much turbulence for them, that they would have been wildly inaccurate with their hits. So they all had to go down this one avenue of approach. And because of this, they were really only able to target two of the battleships, which was the USS Oklahoma and the West Virginia. So they took the brunt of the damage from these. There were a couple planes that came from different directions that were able to get hits on the USS California, which is over here. Now by this time, ever since they first bombed the Hickam airfield, the Americans were able to prepare their air defenses and get those up and going. So they were able to shoot down the last 7 bombers that came in through here. After this, some aircraft came in through this avenue, and they wanted to take out the rest of Battleship Row. These planes came in groups of 5, not necessarily single file like they did before. They were able to sustain hits on Maryland, Tennessee, and most notably Arizona. However, there was a 60% dud rate with their bombs, so that was something that could have gone better for them if they had more effective weaponry. The Arizona was the most notable of all of these. It sustained 2 hits, one of which hit near a turret and caused a magazine explosion, which caused serious damage. There were also almost 1,200 people on board the Arizona who died that day. The Nevada, which is the one on the end right there, was not hit, and because it did not take any damage, it began to leave the harbor. And so this ends the first wave, which took nearly 45 minutes. The second wave began at 8:54 a.m. Now keep in mind, there were many more air defenses up and running by the Americans. So this happened from 167 aircraft, 78 of which were dive bombers to attack the rest of the ships in the harbor. The first bombers, nearly 14 to 18 dive bombers, targeted the Nevada, which was trying to leave the harbor. This wasn't necessarily a smart move by them, because as you'll see later, there were many other targets that they should have had their focus on. So they ended up hitting the Nevada a lot, and the Nevada had to beach before it could leave the harbor. The next that they targeted was the USS California again, which took hits from 3 dive bombers. Because the USS California had maintenance going on earlier that day, all of its hatches were open, so it sunk a lot easier than most of the ships. Most of the attacks in the second wave were scattered throughout the harbor. The next after that was the Pennsylvania, which is this down in the bottom. Pennsylvania only took 1 hit. 9 bombers targeted it, but only took 1 hit. but the destroyers in front of it, those two little black ships, took the brunt of the damage. Those two destroyers are the Cason and the Downs. Next one after that was the USS Shaw, which took hits from 15 bombers. After this, the USS Curtis, which was a cruiser up in the top, took a hit from a suicide bomber and was slightly damaged. The Raleigh, which took one hit, remember in the beginning of the first wave, took hits from 5 more bombers. Now, throughout all of this, there was really only a 19% hit rate by the Japanese. This could have been because it was slightly overcast, but there were other reasons such as the defective bombs, etc. So this wasn't great on their part, and they also should have focused their targets on other ships. Some analysts of this battle have said that they should have targeted the USS Phoenix up here on the top, and then even more so, they should have targeted this naval field down on the bottom. Because as you can see there, there's 4 cruisers all close together right there. There's lots of flammable surroundings around them, and so they would have been an easy target. There were actually 10 bombers who went for this naval field. None of them hit except for one that got a near miss on the Honolulu, which is the one farthest to the right. So they should have dealt a lot more damage to them, maybe using some of the aircraft that went for the USS Nevada as it was leaving the harbor. They could have focused more of their attention on this. So this ended the second wave. So the casualties that came from it on the US side, the Arizona, Oklahoma, West Virginia, California, Nevada, which was beached, Utah, Oglala, and Vestal. These were all sunk, as well as 160 aircraft were destroyed. Ships that took heavy to moderate damage were the Shaw, Cason, Downs, Helena, Raleigh, and the Curtis. Ships that took light damage were the Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Maryland, and Honolulu. All the lives that were lost that day were 2,335. Nearly half of those were on board the Arizona when it got sunk, and there were almost 1,200 wounded. Now, despite all the anti-aircraft, the Japanese only lost 29 aircraft and 5 midget submarines. Everything else was able to be returned to Japan. So in closing, despite the poor targeting and the low hit rate, this was an effective attack by the Japanese, because remember again, their goal was to just disable the Americans for a short time, temporarily, while they were doing whatever they wanted to be doing in the Pacific. So it worked. Most of the ships were out of commission for at least 6 months in Pearl Harbor, so there wasn't much that the US could do. However, most of the ships that didn't sink were later commissioned back into the war in World War II. And so this was, like I said, the final straw that kind of led to the entrance of the US into World War II. And even though the Japanese were able to succeed in their short-term goal, they ended up losing pretty badly when the Americans ended up joining the war later. So this ends my briefing. If you have any questions, please email me at this email address. Here are my sources for the information that I got. And this concludes my briefing. Thank you.